lagunya Ibu Pertiwi. Ya, kita akan langsung connect dengan the last inspiring speaker kita, Liz Buhhanon, seorang anak muda yang begitu lulus, punya hati misi, tapi dia bingung mau lakukan apa, dan dia pikir dia mesti lakukan dengan cara yang berbeda. Dia ingin mandiri, supaya pelayanan, misi yang ingin dia lakukan itu bisa juga berjalan sejajar dengan talenta dan kemampuannya yang ternyata punya spirit entrepreneur ini. Dan bagaimana kisah perjalanan Liz Buhhanon akan menginspirasi kita untuk punya keberanian, tidak takut untuk memulai. Keberanian seorang pemula, itu yang dikenamakan beginner's Pluck. Dan lewat apa yang beliau sharingkan hari ini sama dengan kondisi pandemi kita, kelihatannya dengan era pandemi semua dibuat, tanah pertandingan dibuat rata. Mau perusahaan gede, besar, perusahaan menengah, perusahaan kecil baru mulai, tanah pertandingannya rata, harus mulai restart ya, seperti kemarin yang Pak Jokowi Presiden sampaikan di pidato, seperti kita harus reboot kalau semua hang, semua mulai dari nol kembali bersama-sama. Nah, bagaimana kita bisa melakukannya? Mari kita saksikan perjalanan Liz Buhhanon, dan setelah itu kita akan mendengar pemaparannya secara langsung.
After getting to know Liz Buhhanon through a grander vision story, we were eager to invite this dynamic leader back as a speaker for the Global Leadership Summit this year. Liz Buhhanon is the co-founder and CEO of a socially conscious fashion brand called Seiko Designs. Liz moved to Uganda with a journalism degree and a desire to learn about the challenges facing women and girls around the world. While living in Uganda, she met an incredible group of academically gifted young women who were getting ready to graduate from high school. Although they tested into university, many of these young women would not be able to afford to continue on to college. After a failed attempt at a chicken farm, Liz designed a pair of sandals and promised 3 young women, Mary, Mercy and Rebecca, that if they made sandals during their gap year, they'd be able to continue on to university. Then she returned back to the United States and started selling sandals out of the back of her car. Today, Seiko Designs is an international lifestyle fashion brand, having created fair trade employment opportunities for thousands of artisans across the globe. And their innovative work-study program has enabled hundreds of women in Uganda to continue on to university and become next-generation leaders in their community. In the US, Seiko is using their business model to democratize social entrepreneurship by putting their product, impact and story into the hands of thousands of women who sell the product, earn an income and create a global impact. Liz was named by Bloomberg Businessweek as a top social entrepreneur and by Forbes as a top 20 speaker. In her new book, Beginner's Pluck, Liz debunks the myth of finding your passion and instead uses her entrepreneurial journey to explore 14 actionable principles for not finding, but building a life of purpose, passion and impact. Please give a warm summit welcome to Liz Buhhanon.
Thank you so much. So several years ago, I found myself in an Ethiopian shoe factory, as one does. And every day in this factory, I would spend most of my time in the very, very back room of the factory in this tiny windowless room, generously referred to as the design lab. And every day, the bell would ring at noon. And when that bell rang, it meant that it was time for us to all go to lunch. So I would go with my Ethiopian colleagues to the cantina where we would drink some Buna, delicious Ethiopian coffee, maybe play some bottle cap checkers before we would all go back for the rest of the workday. Well, on this one particular day, the bell rang at noon and I was working on a project that required a lot of focus and I had a deadline coming up. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to work my way through lunch. And so I'm working away. I have no idea how much time has passed when the factory loses power. Just it gets completely pitch black back there in that little room. But in addition to getting completely pitch black, it was also completely silent. I didn't hear anybody out in the factory. I didn't even hear anybody on the grounds surrounding the factory. I was completely and utterly alone. And so my first thought, naturally, is like, rapture, that happened. And like, clearly I was left behind. And then my next, more correct thought was, oh my gosh, it's Saturday. And on Saturdays at this factory, we only work a half day. So when that bell rings at noon, it's not so that everybody can go to lunch for an hour, it's so that everybody can go home for the entire rest of the weekend. So I managed my way out of this pitch black little room through this dark factory to the very front where the giant steel doors had indeed been closed and padlocked shut from the outside. And my worst suspicions were confirmed. I was going to be spending the next 2 nights alone by myself in an Ethiopian shoe factory. And then I heard these voices in the distance, really far in the distance. And so I picked up a shoe last, which luckily for me is really hard and heavy, and I started banging it up against the steel doors, and I'm screaming the only Amharic word that's coming to me in my panic, which is salam, which quite literally translates to, may the peace of God be with you. So while I'm screaming, salam, salam, someone is hearing, may the peace of God be with you. But the voices, they started getting louder and louder, and they came closer and closer, and it was the 2 little old ladies that were the secretaries at the front office of this factory. And they came to the steel door, and through this door and our language barrier, I managed to explain, like, hey, got myself locked in the factory. And they managed to explain that unfortunately the guy that had the only key went home like hours ago. Y'all, it was a several hour ordeal that those women stayed with me on the other side of that door before I was finally rescued. And this was the celebration that ensued. Booty slap. There you go. I promise we'll make our way back to being locked in a factory. But before we do that, I want to take you further back, because about 5 years prior to getting myself locked in this factory, I had designed a pair of strappy, funky sandals. I didn't consider myself a designer, but I had the idea for these sandals when I was in college, and I had the very profound thought, wait for it, I would love a pair of flip-flops that don't flop. And so I took a pair of rubber shower sandals, photo that perhaps against better judgment, getting ready to share with a few 100,000 of my closest friends. Y'all, this photo was taken of me. Yeah, not after I just emerged from my bedroom after having a violent stomach flu, which is kind of what this vibe says to me. Oh, no. This photo was taken of me on the day I got engaged. This was the best I could manage. Okay, so for reasons that we will get to later, with no background or interest in fashion or business, I had designed these sandals, set up manufacturing, and started selling them out of the back of my car. Literally. This is a photo that was taken on Highway 5 right outside of LA. My husband and I were on our way to LA for an event where we needed to sell sandals, and we got stuck in just the terrible gridlock, standstill, put your car in park LA traffic. And I'm stressing out because I'm like, we have several hundred pairs of sandals in the back of our car that we need to sell. When it dawned on me that I had an incredibly captive audience in gridlock. And so I got out of my car and started walking down the side of the highway, knocking on windows, offering to sell beautiful fair trade sandals for the low, low price of whatever money you happen to have right now. But somehow it actually worked. We spent the next 5 years building out a best-in-class manufacturing company in Uganda and built up a network of hundreds of stores across the United States that were selling these sandals. But we knew if we were going to continue to grow, we needed to evolve. We had this one product that took us further than we could have possibly imagined. But we knew if we wanted to continue to grow, we were going to have to pivot our business model, because we saw the future of retail. because every month, stores that were carrying our products and dozens of others that had been open for decades were closing their doors. And we realized that in order for retail to survive the e-commerce revolution that was happening, it either needs to be convenient and really cheap, a race to the bottom, if you will, or it needs to be unique and social and experiential. We started dreaming about what it would look like to take our mission of creating community and opportunity for women in East Africa and bringing it right here at home to the United States by putting our products and our brand and our impact into the hands of women who wanted to use their time and their skills and their passion to make a positive impact in the world, but like a lot of us, might feel a little bit overwhelmed about what to do or where to start. But to make this shift from a wholesale model to a direct model was an immense risk. At this point, we had spent 5-6 years building out this wholesale business. So much time and money and energy, and this wholesale channel now represented over 75% of our annual revenue. And we knew that if we pursued this new dream, this new vision, that virtually overnight we would find ourselves in a new industry. We would need a new financing strategy, we would need a new team to take us there, and we would absolutely need to expand our product line to support that shift. So here I was, 5 years into my career, still without a formal degree or background in designing and prototyping and getting myself locked into these Ethiopian shoe factories. And I was really afraid. I was, of course, afraid of the prospect of spending 2 nights by myself in a factory, but more than that, I realized that I was just waking up on most days in a state of fear, because I had this sense that today was going to be the day that the curtain got pulled back and that I was seen as the imposter and the fake that I really am. Today was going to be the day that I took that risk and then I failed and I embarrassed myself, and everybody saw that what with my journalism degree and my ideals that I clearly have no business running a business. They would see, those strappy sandals, that wholesale company they built. It was all just beginner's luck. Beginner's luck. You've probably heard this phrase before. It refers to the supposed phenomenon of a beginner experiencing success. And this phrase kind of started to haunt me. This idea that I would take a risk and fail and people would look at me and go, see, it was just beginner's luck. Well, I don't want to spoil the story, but we ended up taking the risk. We took our products off of store shelves and we put them into the hands of women in their community. A mom of 4 from rural Indiana, a social justice researcher and educator from Ann Arbor, and a photographer and foster mama from Texas. And in their first full year of styling their friends and selling the product and earning income, these few dozen women, they generated more in revenue and impact for our company than we had ever done through our wholesale channel. We realized that as a company, we could create community and opportunity not just for women in East Africa, but for women right here at home. But throughout my career, nearly every time an opportunity to take a risk and evolve, big or small, emerges, soon to follow is this nasty little insecurity that says, yeah, but if you try and fail, that is going to be so embarrassing and they're going to know that you are a fake and that you've been faking it all along. Everyone's going to know that it was just beginner's luck. A few years ago, I started thinking more about this phrase. But more importantly, I started trying to think about myself before this particular insecurity emerged. And I had to go back. I had to go really far back, all the way to my 22-year-old self who had quit her corporate job and moved to Uganda without a job, without a plan, just this insatiable sense of curiosity, a willingness to ask hard questions and to follow leads, and this belief that I could be a part of something that was bigger than myself. And I started wondering if 10 years into my career, now running this company with millions of dollars in annual revenue and hundreds of employees on different continents and payroll taxes and burn rates and investors, if maybe learning how to intentionally channel my inner beginner could help me become a more effective and innovative leader for the long haul. I started wondering if maybe the success that I had getting Seiko up and off the ground, and by the way, not without plenty of failures along the way. You know, that factory I got myself locked in. Yeah, I spent 2 years trying to develop and launch a line of closed-toed shoes out of that factory, and the project failed miserably. So miserably that I may have buried a pair of those shoes in my backyard in a bad ideas funeral, because I do believe that even our bad ideas deserve the dignity of being laid properly to rest. You may think that I'm kidding, but this is what a bad idea funerals looks like, if you're wondering. R.I.P. to those pink loafers. But I started wondering if the success that I did have getting Seiko up and off the ground, if maybe it had less to do with beginner's luck and everything to do with a little something I like to call beginner's pluck. Let's talk about the word pluck, because I'm not referring to the verb pluck, which is what you do to that pesky chin hair when you think no one is watching. I'm referring to the brilliant and underused noun pluck. It means spirited and determined courage. I started thinking maybe she didn't succeed despite her beginner status, but maybe precisely because of it. I started thinking about the mentalities and the mindsets that I had in my earliest days, long before I would have self-identified as an entrepreneur or a designer or as a business leader. And I started wondering if 10 years into running this company, if perhaps learning how to channel that could help me become a more effective leader. I want to talk to you guys about the 4 stages of learning. My guess is that at some point in your leadership journey, you've seen this concept. And if so, you've probably seen something like this to illustrate it. Okay, we all start out in the land of unconscious incompetence. This is like a pretty happy-go-lucky stage, right? You don't really know what you don't know. My 3-year-old son is living his absolute best life in unconscious incompetence every day. And then you have a moment of awareness, okay? You make the team. You get into the dream school. You get the promotion. You raise your hand and you ask for more responsibility. And you have this moment of awareness where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm very aware of what I don't know. Most of us dread this stage for obvious reasons. Because of all of the stages, this is where our egos are most fragile and our insecurities seem to rage. And the best advice that all the experts give us is basically like, fake it till you make it. Just get through it as soon and as fast as possible. And eventually you will get to conscious competence. So this is the stage of learning where you're like, okay, I can do this. It takes a little bit of practice. It takes some intention, but I'm starting to figure it out. But practice makes perfect, right? So just keep practicing. Keep moving through, because eventually you will arrive in the golden state of unconscious competence. This is the stage of mastery and expertise, where we are so good at this thing, we can literally do it in our sleep, okay? And from here, we get to start our leadership journeys. We get to become the leaders and the mentors and the teachers and the influencers that we always dreamed of being, right? Wrong. What I want you to understand is that this image of the stages of learning is actually really insidious. And if you believe in this, it's going to keep you from being a leader who innovates and who takes risks. And it's certainly going to keep you from being someone who can teach and equip and encourage other people to do the same. Because when we believe in this image of leadership, we start to naturally act out of fear of losing our place at the top. And those feelings that we felt down there in the land of conscious incompetence, they become even scarier, because now they're a sign that we must have gotten knocked down a few notches. Or even worse, they're proof that we were actually always stuck down there, but we just managed to convince enough people that we were further along than we were, and now we're at risk for being exposed. But the stages of learning are actually a cycle. And innovative and courageous leaders, they know that mastery and expertise isn't actually the end goal for a leader. The goal is to be someone who is constantly moving through the cycles of learning. And the most innovative and courageous and pluckiest of leaders, they actually celebrate. Not just when they reach mastery and expertise, although that's really important, but they actually also celebrate when they find themselves back in conscious incompetence, because that means that they did what only real and true leaders and visionaries did. When they completed their previous learning cycle, instead of choosing comfort and protecting themselves, they voluntarily dove headfirst back into the cycle of learning, back into conscious incompetence, or what I like to call the magical land of beginners. In my book, Beginner's Pluck, which launches today here at the summit, 2 months before it's available to anybody else, I share my story of starting and growing Seiko Designs, and I also share the 14 principles that make up the mentality and the spirit of Beginner's Pluck. I truly believe that by learning these principles and living them out, you will become more likely to dive out of mastery back into conscious incompetence, and in the process, you will become a more courageous and innovative and creative leader. And in fact, the very things that used to ignite your insecurities and your imposter syndrome are going to be the very things that make you say, honey, I'm home. I'm back in the magical land of beginners. Now, I obviously can't share all 14 principles with you today, but I do just want to let you know as an overview that these are just going to be really fun, uplifting principles. They're going to make you feel really good. We're going to talk about how incredibly important it is that we dream small. Dream small. Okay, we'll get back there. Stick with me, because it's going to get good. Because next, I'm going to encourage each and every one of you. I'm just going to say, listen, you just got to go out there and you got to find your passion. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I misread my notes. Actually, you're never gonna find your passion. Because here's what Pluckies know. They know that you don't find your passion, but you can build it. And that's an incredibly important difference that we're gonna learn about. Next up, okay, and obviously this one is for real. If there is anything you guys could take away from today, I want you to know how incredibly each and every one of you are so average. I'm sorry, but statistically speaking, this is how averages work. Like, we are all mostly hanging out somewhere in the middle of the bell curve. But the good news is, what Pluckies know is that you don't actually have to be above average in talent or intellect to live an above average life. In fact, I believe that if we can just get over ourselves and freaking own our average, that we will actually go on to build extraordinary lives of purpose and passion and impact. I'm still thinking about adding this one to our t-shirt collection for the fall. What you think about that? Here's the thing. My guess is that a lot of the principles of Beginner's Pluck, they might surprise, slightly offend you, because over the last 10 years of starting and growing my own social enterprise and teaching and coaching thousands of other entrepreneurs to do the same, I've been learning firsthand how this ubiquitous, inspirational, like, find your passion and you'll never work another day in your life narrative is actually affecting us. And here's the thing, what's I think meant to be inspirational is actually creating fear and anxiety and serious analysis paralysis. We're gonna start with this one. Dream big. Okay, y'all, you cannot open up Instagram or walk down the self-help aisle without some inspirational guru shouting this at you, right? And here's the thing, if you've known me for more than 10 seconds, you know that I love dreaming big. But the problem is, over the last 10 years, I have met so many people who are in this place where they're like, yeah, duh, okay, we get the message. Of course I want to be somebody who dreams big, but how? How do I get the big dream in the first place? Or maybe I have this dream, but it's so big, I don't know what to do with it. Or maybe even worse, I have this dream, but I haven't done anything with it because I don't know, is it big enough? Principle number 3 of Beginner's Pluck is to actually start by dreaming small. You see, when I get introduced on a stage or before a podcast, a lot of times the introducer will say something to the effect of how I quit my one-way job and moved to Uganda and she's a big dreamer. And while it's quite nice for my ego to be seen as someone who easily dreams these big dreams, I want to be really honest with you and tell you about how that story actually went down. You see, when I was in college, I was really passionate about issues that were facing women and girls living in extreme poverty and in conflict and post-conflict zones. I took the classes, I wrote the papers, I marched in the protests, I went on to graduate school, all the an international correspondent who's never really left the United States of America before. It's fine. So I went on and got this, corporate job where every day I spent my time compiling media reports and helping big companies get bigger. And all the while I was kind of holding this big dream in my back pocket because obviously I needed a better job title, I needed more resources, I needed more connections before I could ever think about getting that big dream off of the ground. But every day I spent just kind of thinking about my big dream and not working on it, it started to feel a little more impossible, a little more elusive, a little more like the remnants of this silly, idealistic grad student who was now just in the real world doing what she needed to do to survive. And then one day, sitting in my little cubicle on the 18th floor of this office building, everything changed. And I won't get into the details now, but I had this come to Jesus moment where I realized that despite the fact that I said I was passionate about this issue facing women and girls living across the world in extreme poverty, the reality was I didn't have a single friend who was a girl who grew up in that context. While I was busy thinking and dreaming and pontificating about a million girls, the sacred value and importance of just one got lost somewhere along the way. And it was really humbling, and I'm sitting at my desk crying, realizing there's a pretty big delta between what I say I care about and the actual life that I'm living and the community that I'm building. Thank you. And in that moment, I think without even realizing it, I traded in that really big, impressive sounding dream. And I started dreaming small. Really, really small. My new dream became not about bringing 1 million women and girls out of poverty, but about knowing one. About making a single friend. That was it. That was the new microscopically small dream. I needed 0 fancy job titles. I needed $0 million budgets. I needed 0 permission from my bosses to make a single friend, which of course all meant 0 excuses. As soon as I took that really big dream and I started dreaming really small, made it as small as it could possibly go, I became a doer instead of just a dreamer. And I bought a one-way plane ticket to Uganda. Can you imagine what my parents said when I was like, Mom and Dad, I'm quitting my job in the height of the recession to move to Uganda. And they're like, Uganda? What are you doing in Uganda? And I'm like, Mom and Dad, I'm going to make a friend. And they were like, can't you just join a running club like your sister? By the way, my parents are from Missouri. I don't know where that Long Island just came from. But what Pluckies know is that small dreams have a surprising power of setting our dreams into the motion of doing, launching us out of waiting and into creating. So I showed up in Uganda as a true beginner, very aware of my incompetence, which in hindsight is actually the only way we should ever show up to new places and cultures and communities. And through my journey of simply building community and making friends, I ended up meeting some of the brightest young women in the entire country. These young women were so academically gifted, in the top 5% of women in the country, but the vast majority of them were testing into college but couldn't afford to go. So, like a good American, jumping to conclusions, I started a charity. And luckily, I was surrounded by some amazing Ugandan friends who said, that's great, thank you very much, but here's the deal. If you really want to help, you need to keep the women together, living in community. You need to teach them a skill so that they can earn their way to university. And it would be really nice if you could also contribute to our local economy in the process. If you really want to help, you should start a business. Well, guys, to be fair, I don't think they were much worse off with me than they were with this guy. I mean, that's like 60 live chickens attached to the back of that motorcycle. Then my friend Molly from back home, she was like, what about those like strappy, funky sandals that you made in college? Is that something that you could make there? And I spent the next several months traveling the country by motorcycle, looking for raw materials and meeting with suppliers and prototyping these sandals. And then I went back to the school that I was volunteering with, and I sat down with 3 young women, Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca. And I made these young women a promise that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I promised them that if they made sandals for the 9-month gap between high school and university, that they would go to college in the fall. And they were like, okay. And I was like, okay. And then I came back home and started selling sandals out of the back of my car, which is definitely what your parents want you doing with your master's degree. About 4 days after I get home from Uganda, my now husband, Ben, proposes to me. Yeah, remember this? Star-studded red carpet event. He's literally down on his knees asking me to marry him, and I know I'm supposed to be thinking like romantic, gooey thoughts, and instead I'm going like, ooh, do we talk about the fact that I promised 3 girls in Uganda that I would pay for them to go to college if this little like sandal experiment doesn't work out? Do we have that conversation now, or do I wait until after we're married and our bank accounts are joined? So I obviously waited until after. About a year after we got married, he quit his full-time job. We sold almost everything that we had. We bought a Honda Element, and we started traveling the United States export manufacturers in Uganda. We have a beautiful factory and this amazing all-star, entirely Ugandan executive and management team. We are no longer just a sandal company. We now have beautiful apparel and footwear and jewelry. We have enabled hundreds of female scholars in Uganda and now Ethiopia to continue on to university. We've created fair wage, dignified jobs for now thousands of artisans across the world, and we've created opportunity for thousands of social entrepreneurs here in the US to start and launch and grow their own social businesses. And now we are dreaming even bigger about growing the Seiko Fellows program here in the US so that together we can ensure that every single girl has the chance to learn and to lead. But make no mistake, all of that, it all started with an impossibly small, super unimpressive, half-baked dream of just knowing one girl. Whether you are on the starting block, or maybe you're at a crossroads, if you are feeling lost or overwhelmed, or maybe you are leading others that do, please do not do anything else before you give yourself or those you lead the permission to dream small. Because Pluckies know the surprising power that small dreams have in launching us out of waiting and into creating. But for those of you in this incredibly noble journey, I want to remind you that nobody needs or wants you to be their hero. You know, over the last decade of running this do-good business, just going to be really honest with you guys, I have become increasingly uncomfortable with this dichotomy that exists between the do-gooders and the world changers and their beneficiaries, between the givers and the receivers. I saw it very clearly when I showed up to Uganda as a 22-year-old who didn't know anything and had nothing to offer, and somehow I was seen as this, philanthropic giver for just going in the first place, which I think meant that my friends in Uganda were supposed to play this role of grateful beneficiary. No. You guys, we were created to live in community. And community is when we do this sacred dance of giving and receiving, of needing and being needed. At any time, in any relationship, if we start to get confused and think that our status or our circumstance or our season is the permanent role that we are meant to play in relationship or community, we strip others, and ourselves, frankly, of the dignity of being these complex, multifaceted humans. Each and every one of us in our own unique ways, terribly broken and brilliantly bright. The role of leaders is not to be the hero of anyone else's story, but rather to do the hard work in ourselves so that we can inspire and equip others to be the hero of theirs. Speaking of heroes, I want to tell you guys about a woman named Aggie. Aggie grew up just a few hours outside of Kampala, and when Aggie was 13 years old, a village elder approached her father and offered him 20 cows in exchange for her hand in marriage. That was a really good bride price, so everybody in the entire village was shocked when Aggie's dad said, no, I want to keep her in school. And Aggie went on to finish high school, and then she became the first woman in her entire community to finish college. When she graduated from university, she came out into the workplace and she was, looking for a job. And for 4 grueling months, every single job interview that she had, she was either outright rejected or the male hiring manager said, yeah, I'll give you the job if you sleep with me. Now, let me be very clear. This is not exclusively an Africa problem. Okay, this happens in Kampala, and it happens in Hollywood, and it happens in churches and organizations and communities all across our country as well. Aggie, when I met her, she was understandably discouraged. I was a year or 2 into running Seiko, and she was like, do you have a job for me? And I was like, you seem awesome, but I'm so sorry, I don't. I am literally barely making ends meet, paying the employees that I have. I don't have a job. And she looked at me and she said, listen, let me work for you as an intern for 1 month, and I promise that I will provide value to this company. Well, that's the type of pluck that I cannot refuse. 7 years later, that plucky young woman is the managing director of our entire company in Uganda. She co-chairs the board with me. She's traveled all over Africa negotiating supplies and terms with our raw materials providers. She's stood on stages inspiring entrepreneurs and women and students to build lives and businesses that matter. But back home, Aggie's village is changing. According to Aggie, about 10 years ago, the average girl in her village was married by the age of 13. Sometimes as early as 8 or 9 years old. Today, less than 10 years later, the average girl in her village is in school where she belongs. And it's because of Aggie. It's because of her and her dad's story that they have seen what happens when a girl has a chance to learn and to lead. Aggie, and her courage and her boldness and her pluck, has created an eternal wake of dignity and possibility and freedom for young girls in Uganda who I will never meet, and who, frankly, I am not equipped to inspire and influence in the way that Aggie can, because Aggie has a unique set of gifts and a voice and a level of influence that I simply don't. You want to talk about pluck. What would you guys do if I told you that all the way from Uganda, Aggie's with us here at the summit? Can we give her a warm summit welcome? Wow.
Thank you.
You guys, truly transformational leadership. It's not about being a hero who's primarily concerned with rising to success or notoriety, but it's about linking arms with others to create a rising tide that lifts all ships.
We started this journey as 2 beginners, believing that we each have a role to play in a world that is so much bigger than ourselves.
Would we do the hard work of constantly diving out of comfort with a sense of curiosity and through trial and error, we will become more of who we were created to be.
And that will light a path for others to do the same and to become the hero of their own story and to create unimaginable impact that they are uniquely suited to create.
Only together can we create lasting change that will make the world a little brighter and more beautiful and more equitable than it was before. Now, as I was thinking about how to end this talk, speaking of together, the only thing that felt fitting or appropriate was to share the wise and inspirational words of the beloved Emilio Estevez. Better known to some of us as Coach Gordon Bombay of the Mighty Ducks, who once told us that ducks fly together. But of course, what I think he meant to say was plucks fly together. And just when you think they're gonna break apart, say it with us, plucks fly together. And when the wind blows hard and the sky is black, plucks fly together. And when everyone says it can't be done, plucks fly together. Plucks fly together. Plucks fly together.
Siapakah Egy di dalam kehidupan kita? Wow. Seorang Buhhanon berkata, saya bermimpi mempengaruhi jutaan perempuan di Uganda, di Nigeria. Tapi mimpi itu nggak pernah kesampaian. Karena saya selalu berpikir mimpi besar, tapi tidak melakukan tindakan kecil. Sampai dia memutuskan mimpi kecil dia adalah berkawan dengan satu orang di Uganda. Diperkenalkan 3 orang yang dia kuliahi. Diperkenalkan Egy yang tadi terbang bersama-sama dengan Buhhanon. Saya yakin Anda dengan saya kalau kita membuka diri kita pasti akan tergetar melihat orang-orang yang justru membuat perbedaan. Mereka orang-orang average. Kita selalu tercuci otak harus jadi orang spesial, you are special, you are special. Padahal kita tahu kita ini biasa-biasa aja. Tapi di mata Tuhan orang yang biasa-biasa justru bisa dipakai untuk hal yang luar biasa. Itu pesan dari Buhhanon. Ketika Anda melihat perjalanan dengan Egy, tantangannya buat kita di segmen penutup ini, putuskan setelah Anda ikut GLS More dalam program Leaders Serve in Crisis, langkah kecil apa yang saya perlu lakukan selesai dari program ini yang bisa menghantar saya kepada pintu kesempatan yang lebih besar. Jangan tunggu, putuskan hari ini kita merenungkan, mencatat satu langkah kecil yang saya mau ubah dan lakukan, dan mendoakan hal tersebut sampai terwujud. Kalau kita nggak karena pandemi bisa bertemu tatap muka seperti tadi National More Coordinator katakan, Bapak Yakobus, kita bisa kumpul di satu tempat yang sudah disewa, sayangnya nggak bisa. Kami sebenarnya ingin mempersiapkan yang namanya sebuah gambaran mengenai sayap-sayap yang tadi Anda bisa pakai untuk foto bersama sebagai visualisasi bahwa kalau seorang Buhhanon bisa terbang bersama-sama Egy, kita juga bisa terbang dengan mimpi kecil yang akan membawa kita terbang lebih tinggi. Saya membayangkan Anda sedang berdiri di tengah-tengah sayap tersebut, membayangkan wajah setiap Anda peserta yang hadir dalam GLS More hari ini, dan sayap-sayap itu adalah setiap tindakan-tindakan kecil, mimpi-mimpi kecil yang menjadi kekuatan untuk membawa Anda terbang lebih tinggi ke depannya. Apa yang bisa kita lakukan? Anda bisa mencatat langkah kecil apa yang bisa Anda mau lakukan. Itu adalah sehelai seperti bulu dalam sayap yang Tuhan berikan buat kita. Dan ketika kita merasa tidak sanggup lagi kekuatan, Tuhanlah yang membuat kita bisa membuka sayap kita, memberikan angin, memberikan dorongan untuk kita terbang tinggi. Karena kita mulai dari hal kecil, kita berangkat dari mimpi kecil. Lakukan itu mulai dari sekarang. Dan sebagai penutup, doa saya diambil dari sebuah lagu yang mungkin Anda sudah pernah dengar lama sekali. Never Enough, lagu yang bagus sekali. Dikatakan Tuhan telah memberikan sebuah mimpi, nggak dikatakan mimpi besar, mimpi heboh, nggak, mimpi kecil nggak apa-apa, pegang mimpi kecil itu. Tapi ketika kita pegang, lakukan, itu menjadi suara yang makin lama makin kencang. Mari kita berdoa bersama. Bapa di sorga, biarkan pesan ini menggetarkan hati kami, khususnya kami yang mengalami tantangan di era pandemi ini, berkata, susah banget hidup di era pandemi ini. Kami mau belajar dari seorang Buhhanon, berkata, memang susah, tapi bisa. Bukan berkata bisa, tapi susah. Banyak orang berkata bisa, tapi susah. Setelah kami mendengar Buhhanon, kami mau berkata susah, tapi bisa. Dan dia berangkat dari mimpi yang kecil. Dan Tuhan, kami ingin belajar dari lagu ini juga, bahwa never enough untuk kami hanya bermimpi buat diri kecil kami sendiri. Tidak cukup untuk kami hanya bermimpi buat pekerjaan kami saja. Ada hal-hal besar yang dititipkan buat kami di depan kami. Dan berikan kami kehausan untuk melakukan hal-hal yang baru, hal-hal yang kecil. Karena iman di era new normal ini tidak akan tergerus, karena iman tidak mengenal era. Iman selalu membuat kami punya pengharapan. Di dalam berkat nama Tuhan Yesus, kami berdoa, kami mengucap syukur. Amin.
I'm trying to hold my breath, let it stay this way. Can let this moment end. You set up a dream with me, getting louder now. Can you hear it echoing? My hand, will you share this with me? 'Cause darling, without you, all the shines of thousand spotlights, all the